Chapter 8 Kabuliwala. Kabuliwala is one of the finest stories of Rabindranath Tagore. It is really an inspiring story. My daughter Minnie, who is 5 years old, cannot live without talking. She has not wasted even a minute in all her life in silence. Her mother often gets vexed at this and would stop her from prattle. But I would not. I can never bear to see her quiet. It seems unnatural. And so my own talk with her is always lively. One morning, when I was writing the 17th chapter of my new novel, she came into the room and putting her hand into mine, asked many questions. Father, Ramdayal, the doorkeeper calls a crow a crow. He doesn't know anything, does he? Before I could answer her question, she put another question without any delay. What do you think, Father? Bhola says there is an elephant in the clouds blowing water out of its trunk, and that is why it rains. Father, what relation is mother to you? Before I could answer any of these, she was sitting at my feet and drumming her knees. I was in the middle of the 17th chapter when she suddenly ran to the window and shouted, "A Kabuliwala! A Kabuliwala!" She started to call him loudly. He was in the street wearing loose soiled clothing and a tall turban with a big bag on his back and boxes of grapes in his hand. I thought that he would come in and I would not be able to finish my 17th chapter. He looked up and saw Minnie. She ran away to her mother's protection and disappeared. She had a blind belief that inside the bag which the big man carried were perhaps 2 or 3 children like herself. The peddler entered my doorway and greeted me with smile. I bought a few things and we talked about Abdur Rahman, the Russians, the English and the frontier policy. Before leaving, he asked, "And where is the little girl, sir?" I wanted Minnie to get rid of her false fear and had her brought out. She stood close to my chair and looked at the Kabuliwala and his bag. She refused to take the nuts and raisins which he offered. This was their first meeting. One morning, a few days later, I was shocked to see Minnie seated on a bench near the door, laughing and talking, with the great Kabuliwala sitting at her feet. The corner of her little sari was stuffed with almonds and raisins. Minnie had never found a patient listener like him, says her father. I gave him an 8 anna coin and said, "Why did you give her those?" He accepted the money without demur and put it in his pocket. When I returned an hour later, Minnie's mother was upset that she had accepted almonds and raisins from the Kabuliwala. She said, "Oh Minnie, how could you take it from him?" I saved Minnie from an impending disaster and made a few inquiries. Now, Minnie and Kabuliwala became close friends. The Kabuliwala had overcome the child's fear by a judicious bribe of nuts and almonds. They shared quaint jokes with each other, which gave them much amusement. Whenever she asked what his big bag contained, he would reply in a nasal accent, "An elephant." Minnie would look at his huge frame in all her dignity and burst out laughing. He would ask her, "Well, little one, and when are you going to your father-in-law's house?" Now, most Bengali maidens are familiar with the term father-in-law's house, but we, being little newfangled, had kept these things from Minnie. She must have been confused at this, but did not show it. She would ask, "Are you going there?" Amongst the men of Kabuliwala's class, father-in-law's house meant the jail, where we all are properly cared for at no expense to ourselves. He would say, "I will thrash my father-in-law." They would burst into peals of laughter. Minnie's mother would often put in a word of caution, "Beware of that man." Minnie and Kabuliwala spent much time together. Once a year, in January, Rahman, the Kabuliwala, used to go to his country, and he would be busy collecting debts from house to house. But he would always find time to come and meet Minnie. One morning, there was an uproar in the street, and looking out, I saw Rahman being led away, bound between 2 policemen with blood stains on his clothes, and one of the policemen carrying a knife. I inquired what had happened and learned that a certain neighbor had owed Rahman some money for a Rampuri shawl but falsely denied having bought it. In the ensuing quarrel, Rahman had struck him. Minnie shouted, "Oh Kabuliwala! Kabuliwala! Are you going to the father-in-law's house?" His face lit up and he said, "Just where I'm going, little one. I would have thrashed that old father-in-law, but my hands are bound." He was sentenced to some years' imprisonment on the charge of murderous assault. Years passed by and he was not remembered. It was autumn and Minnie was to be married that night, and the preparations were in full swing. Since dawn, the Shehnai had been sounding, and at each beat, my heart throbbed. I was just feeling the pain of separation from Minnie. I was in the study when someone entered and saluted respectfully. I could not recognize him, but when he smiled, I knew him again. He had brought a few almonds, raisins, and grapes wrapped in a paper. He had been released from jail the previous day and had come to see Minnie. I told him that it was not possible to meet anyone because all were busy with the ceremonies. I was about to pay him, but he said, "You have a little girl. I too have one like her in my home. I think of her and bring fruits for your child." He took out a small and dirty piece of paper and unfolded it on my table. It bore the impression of a little ink-smeared hand. This touch of his own little daughter he always carried with him as he came to Calcutta to sell his wares in the streets every year. Tears came to my eyes. I realized that he was also a father, separated from his dear little daughter. I sent for Minnie. She was clad in red silk with sandal paste on her forehead, adorned as a bride. Kabuliwala had imagined her to be the same little girl who would come running to him. He said, "Little one, are you going to your father-in-law's house?" Minnie understood the meaning of the word father-in-law. She flushed up at the question and turned down her face. After she left, Rahman sat on the floor. He suddenly realized that his daughter too must have grown up. He would have to make friends again. I took out a banknote and gave it to him. I told him to go back to his country and meet his own daughter. I wished that the happiness of his meeting might bring good fortune to my child. I had to reduce some festivities, having made this present. I could not have the decoration of electric lights, nor the military band, and the ladies of the family were despondent at it. But the wedding feast seemed brighter to me because of the thought that in a distant land, a long-lost father met his only child again.